So my name is Diane Ryan. I'm the Associate Dean at Tisch College, and I'm also a faculty member in Elliott Pearson Department of Child Studies and Human Development. And we're very grateful and excited to have our guest today, Helen Immordino-Yang, who I am not introducing. I am the person who gets to hand the microphone off to our provost. But on behalf of Tisch College and Deborah's work in Tisch College with the social and emotional learning for civic engagement effort, we are delighted to kind of be the anchor sponsor of this event. So I just want to briefly tell you about Tisch College if you're not familiar with our work. Our mission is kind of simple. It's to save democracy. But the longer mission statement is about preparing students for a lifetime of civic engagement, for researching the intersections between public and private life, and to promote best practices in community and civic engagement. And part of that, we know none of that happens without building strong people and strong relationships. And that's the essence of the talk that we're going to have today. So that's the mission of Tisch College. And we have several sponsors today that I would be remiss if I did not thank. In addition to Deborah Donahue-Keegan, who has put all of this together, I want to thank her for having the vision and seizing the opportunity, because I know that our speaker is highly in demand, and she had the good foresight to realize that she was going to be in the area and we could capitalize on that. We also have the Center for Enhancement of Teaching and Learning, the Institute for Applied Research and Youth Development, and three departments, the Department of Education, Child Studies and Human Development, and Psychology. Did I forget anyone? Okay, so I managed to memorize all those in my walk down the hill, but we're very excited about today's opportunity, and also to have the provost here, who I know is exceptionally busy, and so for her to be able to take time out to be here speaks volumes about the importance of this work. So we're certainly grateful to her and for all of you for being here today, and most of all our guests, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce our distinguished speaker and to be here today. I'm very busy, so I apologize already that I will not be able to stay, even though I really want to, because the topic is fascinating to me. I too would like to thank all the organizers, not only Tisch College, you heard also SEL-CE, our Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching, the Institute for Applied Development in Youth Research, and the Education Elliott Pearson Child Study and Human Development and Education and Psychology departments for all their efforts and work in making this talk possible. And I'd like to thank our distinguished speaker, Dr. Helen Immordino-Yang, for joining us today and making time out of her busy schedule and flying actually from the West Coast. So welcome very much to Tufts. Mary Helen's groundbreaking research is really illuminating to me and to all of us here at Tufts, and is very relevant across Tufts University, both inside and outside of our classroom. We all suspect that emotion plays a very important role and is very linked to cognition, but it's a suspicion, and I'm very excited that Mary Helen's work actually suggests that emotions are actually integral to learning, teaching, and research. That's fascinating and very exciting to me. And as provost, one of my top priorities, of course, is to foster a culture that is supportive and encouraging so that all our students develop not only academically, but also personally, emotionally, and socially here on campus. And I think this work is particularly relevant to our core values at Tufts, so focused on undergraduate and graduate education, but also on research. And we are very fortunate to have Tisch College, which is related to all our schools and departments across the university. And they have actually a special initiative on something very related to what our speaker is talking about. The initiative on social, emotional learning and civic engagement, which helps us across the whole university to integrate social, emotional learning and across the university, but also in coordinated ways, and cultivate inclusive intellectual rigor, well-being, and civic engagement. And I want to also mention that Tisch College is the glue for us to do this, a rigorous education, but in the context of civic engagement, the betterment of society, emotional intelligence, etc. But it's a core value. All these things are core values to Tufts in the sense that actually even our mission statement is very much related to these ideas. We are committed to providing transformative experiences for students and faculty in an inclusive and collaborative environment where creative scholars generate bold ideas, innovate in the face of complex challenges, and distinguish themselves as active citizens of the world. So that's only what Tufts is about. And then Mary Helen's research also focuses on the importance of rest, which is also very important to all of us here at Tufts. Rest is essential for mental health, as we know, well-being, intellectual rigor, academic achievement, and civic engagement. And I cannot stress enough that it's important for all of us, but particularly for our students, to actually rest and refresh and recharge every day. So thank you again for giving me this wonderful opportunity to welcome our prestigious and distinguished speaker. And I believe that she's going to deliver a very fascinating talk. And again, I feel so bad and sorry that I'm not going to be here to hear it. But I hope to talk to all of you at some point and perhaps read about it. So I'm very excited that you could make it today with us. And I'm now delighted to invite Deborah to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. Thank you so much.
So much. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. So it is my delight, my joy to introduce Mary Helen, whom I've known for over 2 decades. And I have known about her work for all of this time and had been talking to her about coming to Tufts. And I'm just so happy that this has happened, that she's here, and I'm so really grateful. So Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang is a professor of education, psychology, and neuroscience at the University of Southern California. She studies the psychological and neurobiological development of emotion and self-awareness and connections to social, cognitive, and moral development in educational settings. And she uses cross-cultural, interdisciplinary studies of narratives and feelings to uncover experience-dependent neural mechanisms, contributing to identity, intrinsic motivation, deep learning, and generative, creative, and abstract thought. Her work has special focus on adolescents from low SES communities, and she involves youth from these communities as junior scientists in her work. A former urban public junior high school science teacher, she earned her doctorate at Harvard University in 2005 in human development and psychology and completed her postdoctoral training in social affective neuroscience with Antonio Damasio in 2008. And since then, she has received numerous awards for her research and impact on education and society. Among them, an honor coin from the US Army, a commendation from the County of Los Angeles, a Cozzarelli Prize from the Proceedings of the US National Academy of Sciences Editorial Board, and early career achievement awards from AERA, the AAAS, and APS, the International Mind, Brain, and Education Society, and the Federation of Associations in Behavioral and Brain Sciences Foundation. And Mary Helen Immordino-Yang was in a 2018-2019 Spencer Foundation Mid-Career Fellow, and she served on the U.S. National Academy of Sciences committee writing How People Learn, Learners, Contexts, and Cultures on the Aspen Institute's National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. And I would say that above all, she's just a phenomenal, caring and kind human being, and so happy that you're here, Mary Helen. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. That's really nice. Thank you. I wasn't nervous until David Rose walked in, and now I'm like, oh, man. I feel like this is my dissertation defense all over again. Can you hear me? I have a mic on. It's coming over the top. Am I loud enough? Okay. I'll try to put that aside and just start. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Deborah, and the others for inviting me. It's really exciting to see how work like mine, which is done mainly in a laboratory and also in high schools and junior high schools especially, is really having implications, I think, for, the things we're discovering have real implications for the way in which we think about what it means to be a person and how our experiences as a person in the world, and I mean experience as like a verb, how we construct meaning out of the things we witness and that happen, how that process is actually fundamental to full actualization as a human being, both in the sort of academic and scholarly sense, and also in the personal sense of well-being and civic engagement. And so I'm going to talk you through some of the different studies that we've been doing, but really I can be a little bit flexible depending. It's a small enough group that I can move around according to interests, and talk to you about different things that I'll mention along the way, like cultural effects and things like that if you're interested in those. But to start, I want to kind of unpack the title of the talk for a minute, this notion of a layered organism of self, right? That we have a brain whose original evolutionary purpose is to manage our body, right? The physiology of our body, to keep us alive, to keep us in a state of allostasis and homeostasis, and to manage our behavior in the world so that we can flourish and our progeny can flourish and those around us can flourish. And that's the original evolutionary purpose of the brain, which still continues now. And it was thought, like in the 70s, for example, like that our more evolved, so to speak, our more recent intellectual capacities as a species kind of layered on top of these basic physiological survival mechanisms, but we're kind of separate from them. This kind of triune brain by Paul MacLean kind of model where you've got this layering of the prefrontal cortex at the top and the brainstem at the bottom that's controlling survival and consciousness and physiology in the basic sense, and that these you need physiological survival to be able to think well, but that's kind of as far as it goes. That thinking is sort of built on top and happens independent of the rest, and everything that we've been discovering totally undermines that notion. What we're really learning is how deeply situated our social mind and our cultural meaning-making processes, the ways in which we build stories out of the things that we witness and string together our experiences in ways that become life narratives that are the fodder for abstract thinking about values, about beliefs, about big ideas, about our disciplinary work, about civic engagement, about all these really abstract notions like justice that come out of our ability to think, but also, I would argue, out of our deep grounding of our thinking in the basic physiological regulation capacity of the body. And this has implications for the constraints and the ways of processing that lead us to full self. Because understanding that these notions are not layered but are actually embedded in one another. And I'll show you this in the data, right, where I get this from. This interrelatedness and sort of codependency, sort of repurposing of survival-related mechanisms in the service of big humanitarian ideas and disciplinary ideas actually gives us new insights into the nature of personal development, the nature of scholarship and of ethics, and of what we should be doing in educational contexts and in society to support the development of flourishing of individuals and of societal groups. And I also want to say, if I say things that aren't clear, I don't know, are there neuroscientists in here? Neuroscientists? Okay, couple. Are there educators in here? A couple psychologists in here? Couple. Okay, so there's like many different kinds of groups. So I will try to explain everything, but if I say things that aren't clear or you don't know what I'm talking about, by all means, it doesn't mean you're stupid, it means I'm stupid. Please raise your hand and interrupt me. So I want to start just with this painting, which in real life is kind of a 6 by 8 foot brilliant watercolor that was painted by my colleague Margaret Lazari at USC. And Margaret and I met like riding the commuter bus in the morning together and started talking about her work as an artist and her desire to try to capture processes of nature. And my work as a scientist and my desire to try to capture processes of human nature as a dimension of nature, right? And we decided to do a project together, and what we did was we took pictures of a person's brain, one woman, brave woman's brain, who got into our MRI scanner, right? And we imaged her brain. We peeled off the outside of the brain, all the little cells, the neurons that do the thinking, right? The cortex. We peeled them off the picture, not off the lady, okay? Just want to be clear. And then what's left underneath is an image of basically what we call the white matter networks, the massive billions, literally billions with a B, of interconnected little hollow, fragile tubes of salt water that are connecting around the space of the head in networks that are linking up on average like 200,000 to 200,000, right? These are incredibly dynamic, interconnected networks that are changing in the moment, over lifetimes, over generations, in ways that reflect our genetics and also, critically, our experiences as we subjectively perceive them, not just what happens to us, but how we interact with and tell stories to ourselves about what happens to us. Turns out to be a critical force in the ways in which these networks are organized. And I'll show you these data in adolescence that we have now. They're just in the process of being published. But the idea is that Margaret has captured the essence of my work, not by painting kind of the brain in the corner in the bucket where we can all put on our special scientific glasses, whatever they are, and we can analyze it over there, right? But she's painted the connectivity of these networks which extend across the space of the head and all the way down into the body, into the ends of your fingers and toes, right? They make you into a coherent organism. She's painted these networks kind of floating, semi-translucent in a seascape of life. She's got them kind of floating along in the ocean, being literally bolstered up and sustained and sloshed back and forth by the world around it. She's got little weeds poking up through the bottom of it. She's got warm sunlight shining down, warming it on the top. She's got little red fish swimming by to represent the spontaneity of our creative ideas. And that is how I think about brain development. We often, especially in education, think about the brain as something that's kind of in the head, sort of separate from the rest of the world. And sure, you can come along as a world and kind of change the way this thing is developing. It has a basic trajectory of development, and then along we come and kind of shift it this way or that way with cultural ways of knowing and things like that. And that is actually not representative of what we're finding at all. What we're finding, us and many other labs looking in many different kinds of disciplines, is that the very development of the brain and body itself are dependent upon triggers and situational cues from the environment that are teaching the genes how to grow a person and how to grow a person under different situations in different contingencies. And if you think this is sort of just metaphor, think about, for example, the heartbreaking stories of Romanian institutionally raised children, right, who were studied by Chuck Nelson and Nathan Fox and others. These kids are raised in an institution where they have the stuff. They have enough food, you know, not great food, but as good as other people in the society. They have beds, they have toys that are being donated from other countries mainly. They have somebody taking care of them, but they don't have you know, families that are engaged with them moment to moment, loving them and bringing them with them, teaching them, here, baby, let me show you what it means to be a human in this kind of world. And so you basically have a rotating staff of caregivers coming through every 8 hours and then going off duty again. And you know, you would think that you would get children who are maybe cognitively delayed or socially inept or emotionally dysregulated. And what you actually get are 17-year-old kids who are 3 feet tall, right? Whose brains weigh a third those of kids who are raised in foster families. What we're learning is that the genius of our evolution, right, is not that our genetics, our genetic code has grown over time to specify all the things we're capable of. And now we've got a calculus gene and a social justice gene and an artistic gene, right? Instead, we have a basic set of operating instructions that vary a little bit across people based on evolutionary history, based on accidents of nature, and that are waiting for input from the environment to teach them how to express themselves. The Human Genome Project revealed that we have far, far fewer genes than we ever imagined we would have. Right? That project was over far faster than the scientists expected it to be. And that tells us something. Our genetics do not specify who we are. They lay out the groundwork for a set of contingency plans. Once you've basically got a head on one end and a butt on the other end and some limbs coming off in the middle, after that, you really need a whole lot of interactions in a cultural space to teach your genes how to grow a person. The question is, how do our experiences enable this person to really flourish and thrive both in physical health and in mental and cognitive and academic and scholarly and civic health? And what can we back engineer from learning about human development in this interdisciplinary way that would inform the way we design experiences of learning for young people, otherwise known as schools? It's hard to see this picture, but I just put it for a second to just kind of remind us, right, where we start. It's actually not where we start. We start 9 months before this, actually way before that. But this is not a picture of me, okay? I don't put pictures of myself in my talk. This is a picture of my sister. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about in this photograph, right? But this is basically a picture of my niece, Nina, when she was 3 hours old. She weighed 3 3/4 pounds. She was the smaller of a pair of twins who were born under an emergency C-section when both my sister and the babies were anesthetized. This is the first time that they've met each other when they're all awake. And I just ask you to think for a second, like, what is going on here? What does Nina bring to this interaction in particular? And how does her mother exhibit that propensity, that reflex, right? In this case, the most obvious one is the reflex that's built genetically, evolutionarily into Nina's visual system that says, when you see 2 dark dots in this kind of configuration, not like this, not like that, not moving, right? 2, and they have to be like this, stare. And the rest will happen, says nature, right? And along comes an adult who loves this baby who says, hey, let me show you what that reflex is for. And you enter into a kind of attunement process that's dyadic, that from the start is driven by interactions between the people involved. Nina brings this desire, or the wrong word, brings this reflex, really, automatic reflex to stare, and along comes an adult and says, hey, let me elicit that reflex from you, and I'm going to set up everything else about the situation, hold your little hands, do your little head at the right angle, make sure you're not hungry, you're not asleep, you're warm enough, everything else is good, and then you can do it. And let me show you what it's for. And guess what? This doesn't stop when you're like 5 hours old or 20 years old or 90 years old. This is the basis of our human biological growth and development across time. Our biology is deeply social. And if you think this is just metaphor, again, think about those Romanian institutionally raised kids. We don't have biology without a cultural world to support it. The biological growth itself is outsourced onto interactions between the person and the environment. So don't try to read this unless you either have a 5-year-old or we're a kindergarten teacher. I will tell you about it, right? But I just want to show you that as kids get older, and we'll get to the college-age kids in a minute, I promise, but as kids get older, they're learning to interpret their own experiences in the world as they live them, affective, cognitive, both. Interpret is cognitive, the experience is both, right? It's all mushed together. It does not make sense to me to pull apart the affective from the cognitive. Those are different lenses that we can shine on a behavior or a person to analyze just that aspect. But that aspect never works in isolation of the other. It's just a dimension of a bigger thought process, which is both. And I want you to just get a sort of an appreciation of how, even in children, these things are growing together as the kid is making meaning. They're building their academic self and their social and emotional self all as one self. So this is a song that my daughter wrote when she was 6 or something, for 5, I don't know, for her baby brother Theodore, whom she calls Teddy. And you can see her in her little dress there. She drew a picture of herself. I just basically took a picture of what she did. And she's got her little music stand, so that tells you a little something about the cultural stuff going on in her house. And she's singing, which I won't sing for you, okay? I'll just read it. But she says, "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual. But sometimes even more, as you make us proud and happy that you're you." So I have a simple question for you. Is this a song about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Or is this a song about her budding interest in planetary science? Right? She, in her little self, says, "Oh my God, we're on this gigantic planet? Really? Doesn't look like a planet to me, but I guess we're on this big, huge ball of dirt in space and it's spinning around and that's why the sun goes by and all this stuff. Okay, I'm trying to get my conceptual head around the idea of that kind of enormity. And wow, I love my baby. I get it. Huge love for baby brother. Huge world. Oh, those go together. I get that. I'm going to build that into one sort of conceptual structure and move forward from there." Now, does that mean that, if she becomes a planetary scientist, which she actually might do, right? If she becomes a planetary scientist, that her interest in planetary science is still tied to her relationship with her brother? No, not directly anymore, right? Any more than my relationship with my husband is tied to my love of the brain and neuroscience. But I would argue that what the neural data is revealing to us is that the same platforms in the brain that are evolutionarily and sort of developmentally grown to feel and regulate your physical survival, the state of your guts and your viscera, are repurposed. And again, I'll show you this in the data. They're repurposed over time through active experience thinking about stuff. Not somebody putting stuff in you, but you trying to make meaning of what does it mean to be on such a huge planet, right? And as you do that, you literally in the brain intersperse and interrelate the networks that you build for thinking about complex concepts with the networks that are given to you and that develop for managing your physiology. And that critical confluence is the essence of why learning is such a deeply emotional, cultural, agentic, self-driven process. That's why. Questions? No questions. All right, keep going. So the big picture idea here with my kids' little jack-o'-lanterns in the back, right? You can't see those candles that are shining inside those pumpkins. You infer things about the state of the light and the heat and the warmth that's inside there by staring through the pumpkin into the middle, and you try to feel it on your own self, and you begin to, sort of empathically resonate with those around you as an entry point into sharing knowledge, building things together. And it's that process that I'm basically talking about today. The big idea is that emotions happen, right? If I dangle you over the edge of a cliff and ask you, what is 2 + 2, right? You don't know in that moment, because the emotional situation, and by that I also mean the way in which you're appraising cognitively and figuring out strategies to get out of there, is not conducive to thinking about 2 + 2 at that moment. Because our emotions are steering our mind and teaching us that what we really need to feel right now is scared, and we really need to shift our mind to a strategy to escape, not think about this other stuff that doesn't seem relevant. We think about the stuff that we're able to construct as relevant. What that basically means is education is a process of learning how to feel. It's a process of constructing experience out that leverages and kind of repurposes and hijacks embodied arousal, physiological regulation of consciousness, digestion, heart rate, and repurposes them for things like interest, curiosity, excitement about math, physics, poetry, whatever. We are growing through our thoughts into a place where we integrate our embodied survival with our mental survival. And this is also why our mental, emotional states are so tied to our physical health, right? Even in monkeys, they're tied to physical health. The monkey that's the low end of the pecking order that gets picked on by the other monkeys, even if it's physically fine, it gets heart disease and high blood pressure, and it dies sooner. Because how we experience our world is critical to our survival, not just what happens to us. That monkey has plenty of food and has all the same medicine and stuff as the other monkeys, but it dies because nobody likes it. So I just want to show a very quick clip from this episode of Nova, which we were featured in, which features our work with adolescents from low SES communities in Los Angeles. I've also done lots of work with college-age kids, because obviously they're the population that's easy to get. But this is the longitudinal study of adolescents that I'm going to talk about later in the talk. But I'm showing it just, it's Nova, it's not very scientifically deep, but I'm showing it just so you get an intuitive sense of what the work looks like, since you don't do MRI research, most of you. You can see the scanner, you can see me with the kids, you sort of get a sense of what this looks like to take forward as I start talking about the results. So I'm just going to play this for you. It's just a couple minutes.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Mary Helen. Nice to meet you.
Since her days as a teacher, University of Southern California neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang has been interested in knowing how emotions factor into learning.
I quickly realized that there was very, very little known about the kind of stuff that we really care about in education, like how people become inspired. How do we become interested in things? How do we build curiosity? And how can we support that process?
In trying to identify which parts of the brain are involved in the deepest and most meaningful learning, Immordino-Yang works with teens from troubled neighborhoods.
We're going to be watching stories. We really want to know what you think, so there's no right or wrong answers. These are kids who see a lot of crime, they see a lot of dangerous things, they see a lot of poverty. And we wanted to understand, how do they make meaning of that world around them? This first one is a story about a girl who lives in Civic, Pakistan. And the city was being taken over and basically run by a group called the Taliban. So I want you to watch her when she was 12 years old.
First, she gets them emotionally engaged in a topic by showing them videos about people struggling to overcome adversity.
And I want to become a doctor.
So how does her story make you feel?
This story makes me feel upset how she wants to be a doctor and continue on with her education, but it makes her sad that knowing her journey would be very difficult.
For adolescents, these types of stories can trigger moments of deep reflection.
They come back from those kind of reflective moments with this heightened appreciation of the meaning of the story and what it applies to in their own life and what it means for the nature of the world more broadly.
And it's crazy how it's that powerful.
Whereas we've known that for a long time in education, the neural data are giving us new insights into the mechanics of that process.
Over here.
To find out which brain regions are harnessed during reflective emotion, Immordino-Yang monitors the students' brain activity as they re-watch the emotional videos in an fMRI scanner.
Hi, Estella, how you doing in there?
Good.
So we're looking at the movement of the blood flow in her brain as she's watching the stories, and where in her brain is becoming more and less active as she's experiencing these emotions.
She found that the reflective thinking caused by these emotional videos triggers widespread activity throughout the brain.
The most high-level brain states that people experience in the scanner don't just activate high-level systems, they also activate lower-level structures of the brain that are involved in regulating and monitoring your consciousness and your survival.
Immordino-Yang believes that the reason why learning and emotion seem so intimately connected is because complex emotion, like admiration, can activate basic brain functions, like those regulating breathing and heart rate.
We think that the reason that humans' values and belief systems and ideals are such powerful motivators is literally that they're hooking themselves into biomechanical machinery that has evolved to keep us alive over time. So emotions are a critical piece of learning always. Meaningful learning, learning that really matters to you, that changes who you are and that endures over time, always has an emotional component.
So I would draw upon any of these.
Her research shows that engaging students on an emotional level makes for more powerful learning experiences.
Okay, so you just get a kind of intuitive sense of what it looks like. I talk with people, kids, people in China, university students at USC, at Beijing Normal University, in Geneva, like we talk with people about stories and also about things that they've experienced in their life. And now we're also starting to talk to them about their academic learning, right? The ways in which they talk to us about projects that they're doing, for example, and how young people from inner city LA schools with these alternative kinds of progressive approaches are making sense out of their own self in the context of a physics project, let's say. And we're looking for these patterns in academics too. For now, we first studied them. We have the findings from asking people to think about complex civic issues, social issues, issues that pertain to their own things that they've witnessed in the world. And what we find is just like Nina's little brother here is showing us, right? As people are engaging with these stories, they make sense out of them in ways that are basically a reflection off of their own inner sense of self and experience. People use their own kind of consciousness and experience base and memories as a platform from which to start to grapple with what other people should be thinking, and they set up a kind of what I call empathic resonance with the story protagonists that leads to them understanding the story, but then also oftentimes, and in very developmental and cultural ways, to them reinterpreting the meaning in terms of something that pertains to their own world, not just to the world of the other person. And we see this social learning happening on the fly when we ask people, how does this person's story make you feel? And feel is an ambiguously cognitive and affective word, right? And that's all we say. So what we can do then, from a methodological standpoint, is we can analyze all manner of behavioral, attentional, word use, prosody, facial expressions, postural shifts, right? Things that a person does in that interview, and look at when we've moved them into the scanner and they say, again, I'm thinking about that girl, we don't give them names, who's in Pakistan, and it's making me feel like this and like that. We can look for and mathematically model systematic alignments or systematic correlations between ways of making meaning in the world, what has actually happened to you in the world, and what happens in your brain and body, because they're also measuring psychophysiological variables, which they don't show that in the NOVA. What happens in your brain and body that to you corresponds to an experience of a particular type. Does that make sense? So we don't assume that I show you a story and bam, you show this response, and that's the average response, and that's our response that we're studying. What we look for is systematic biases in the relationship between neural and psychophysiological activity pattern shifts as they predict within a person what that person says they're experiencing. And then we look for ways to systematically predict that correspond to ways of making meaning in the world across developmental trajectories, across different kinds of contexts, cultural contexts, things like that. Does that make sense? Individual differences. Okay. So I'm just going to take you quickly into the first study that we published on this, which was basically my postdoctoral work with Antonio and Hannah Damasio, in which I first came up with this method and started sharing stories with people. They're all true stories. There's no actors. I've sort of made myself into a kind of amateur documentary filmmaker, right, where I pull stuff off the web and then use it to make little vignettes that are ever so much more compelling than things with actors or that are made-up stories, right, because people have to engage with these as real things. And then we ask people how they feel. And this is just the first study. We're just going to show when you put American English-speaking adults from Los Angeles, right, into the scanner and ask them, tell us how you feel right now in real time. And take all the trials where they say, I am deeply moved by this right now. I'm really thinking hard about this. This is very compelling and important and interesting, compared to the times when they say, I've thought about it, but it's not that, there's not that much there to be moved by, right, or interested in. And unbeknownst to them, there are stories mixed in that are, not as amazingly compelling, and that's the point, but they don't know that, right? And then we look at the difference between those two in the brain, on average. That's what I'm showing you now, okay? And what we basically see is that emotions and emotional thinking and meaning making activate the same brain systems that keep you alive. Here's a map, a statistical map where I've turned all of the little pixels, the little voxels in the brain that show systematically more blood flowing, which corresponds to more neural activity underneath. When people say, I am deeply moved by this, then when they say, I'm not that moved by this, I'm not thinking that hard about it. Okay? What are the first things you notice? You can see this head sliced through this way, right? You got a nose, a tongue, a spinal cord, okay? This is what we call the brain stem. This is the stuff we share with alligators. Turns out alligators have a really wonderful one of like these, the mesencephalon, right? It allows them to be like, think, right? It's like react to the world, monitor your own consciousness, breathe according to the amount of exercise you're going to need to do, predicting what's going to happen next, right? And it's basically a kind of a stalk of that is densely packed little neurons and neuron fiber tracts that are intermediating between the rest of the brain, all the cortex and all these subcortical things up here that were sliced through. Right, so if you slice it this way, turn it up, and you got the forehead up there and the back of the head over here. So it's like this, right? So if you're slicing it through this way and you turn it up, we've got all this stuff in the middle and then all this stuff around the edges. This brainstem is basically the funnel that takes that down into the body and face and takes everything from the world and the body and the eyes and all that back up into the brain. So it's the critical middle junction between those things. And what does this tell us, right? These regions up here, this is the mesencephalon, that have specific kinds of activations in there, even controlling for physiological change, right? What that tells us is that these regions, what we know is that these regions are essential for consciousness in the most basic sense. You get damage in here, you get things like coma and persistent vegetative state, locked-in syndrome, depending on where the damage is. When people are thinking about stories that they find deeply meaningful and emotionally compelling and relevant to their own life, and we know that because we interviewed them about what they were thinking about the story, they show activations in specific networks that reach all the way down into the midbrain, which is far below the level of conscious control. These are survival-related mechanisms. And then all the way down, this is the bottom of the field of view of the scanner. This is what's called the medulla. If you get damage in the medulla, we can't even keep you alive on life support. Short of defibrillating your heart with every beat, you just become completely physiologically dysregulated and you rapidly die. When people are thinking about information that feels personally relevant and meaningful, they are activating regions of this medulla that are quite literally essential for survival. It's as if we are upregulating our consciousness when people say, and she makes me realize I could be much more grateful and be thinking about my opportunities, right? Which I haven't shown you the data where people say that, but even teenagers say that kind of stuff in characteristic ways. When they do that, we can predict trial by trial, story by story, that we will see these patterns of activations later. Our social meaning making and our embodied brain and physiological survival are completely intertwined with one another, and that is where I would argue comes the basic idea that human beings can actually die for ideas. We have values, we have morals, we make wars, we make paintings. No other creature does that to that kind of degree. And there are other key regions that we were very interested in that are important to know about. So we've got the brainstem. We've got regions called the anterior insula. What goes on in here? This is a picture of the insula from Grey's Anatomy, like the textbook, right? Not the TV show. And the eyeball goes right here, okay? So you're looking in from the side. And when you pick up the Sylvian fissure and you kind of look inside there, you've got this big piece of cortex. And now we are in this high-level stuff that we do all this calculation with. And what do we know about this region? In the 1950s, the first sort of maps of the brain were done by a guy named Wilder Penfield, who was a neurosurgeon trying to cure epilepsy, but also an early neuroscientist. There really was no division between the fields at that time. And what he basically did was he would take people with intractable epileptic seizures. He would use EEG, like electric signaling, to try to pinpoint where, as close as possible, they could figure out that the seizure was starting from. And then they would, when they couldn't control it any other way, they would do surgery on the person where they basically put the person to sleep, open up their head, and wake them back up, and then poke around in there and ask them, so Mrs. Smith, how's it going now? Oh, I'm touching your left foot. Oh, and now your knee, and now, oh, wow, there's a little map of a leg on this gyrus, right? And that is the first maps that were made of the alive, awake, functioning human brain. When Wilder Penfield poked around up in here, you know what happened? People vomit. Or they get other kinds of gastromotoric responses, which I will not describe in polite company, right? What he discovered was that this cortex is basically viscerosomatosensory and somatomotor cortex. It's feeling the state of the guts and viscera, and to some extent modulating their activity in accordance with broader calculations that involve thinking. What we now know, to kind of let the cat out of the bag, is that this region is also activated when people are making judgments about aesthetic tastes, about fairness, about morality, about math when they love math. The same regions of the brain whose evolutionary day job is and was and continues to be to monitor the digestion of your food and your heart rate, right, that tells you when your heart's pounding if you run up a set of stairs, is the region that turns out to be a pivotal platform for feeling engaged with information. It also turns out to be a pivotal platform for something called the brain's salience network, which is basically the discovery over the last couple of years that these brain regions don't work in isolation. We knew that for a long time, but how they're connected to each other, we needed a lot of new tools, and now we're starting to study how their activity and crosstalk between characteristic regions in the brain is related to the kind of modulation of whole brain states around kind of modes of thinking or modes of brain pattern across the whole brain that allow you to think in ways or to fall asleep, these kinds of regulated behaviors that are kind of organized in the brain as a big circuit. And this region is a central hub of this region that is basically tuning your attention either into the world, like watch out for the snakes, or ooh, that's interesting, or ooh, look at her, right? Back into, like, let's let that go. I can leave the current state of here and now, and I can build some kind of what psychologists call task-independent thought. I can kind of build a free-form model of whatever I want to think about that doesn't necessarily need to be in the physical here and now. Enter ideas, morality, conceptual understanding, innovation, creativity, a sense of identity, not just self in the like physical sense, but like I stand for these beliefs. I am this kind of person. I fit these categories, and these are what I do. All of those kinds of thinking that are constructed basically without relevance, direct relevance to the immediate physical here and now, are constructed in this mode of the brain. Let me show you it, because I forgot to change slides, which we called the default mode network. It was first described in this way by Marcus Rakel and some colleagues at University of Washington, Washington's University of St. Louis, who basically thought of something very clever. I mean, the bottom line is what they did is they thought we've been using neuroimaging to study all the ways in which the brain activates when you show people math problems and snakes and scary dogs and people they love and pornography and whatever. Like they had, all that stuff is in there. And then they thought, well, what would happen if we put people in the scanner and we ask them to just think about nothing? Just relax, rest, don't fall asleep, think about nothing. They thought they were going to discover the so-called brain's default mode, right? And ours was among the first studies, if not the first study, to actually ask people to do an effortful task that activated these characteristic regions that are connecting together during certain modes of thought that are non-task directed, quote unquote. What did we ask people to do? Tell us how you feel about this. Think about this and tell us what it means to you. And that's kind of the discovery that got us the PNAS Prize, by the way. Okay. Which I think it came out of the data. I mean, to be fully honest, we didn't expect it. All right. Now let me tell you a little more about the default mode network, because I think it turns out to be really important for understanding education and for understanding the development of virtues, values, character, not just in the action-oriented sense. What do you do? But who are you, and what do you believe, and how do your beliefs and values and virtues shape you, no matter what context you move into, right? And it's also connected to all the things your provost said about innovation and creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. What is that? It's thinking about things that don't exist yet. You can't do that in the real physical world because they don't exist yet, right? So I ask you to these are the kinds of stimuli that we use that activate or don't activate this network, so you can make a guess. So these are videos, really, with whole stories attached, but you can just look at this picture from the video in our stimuli and get a sense of what's going on there. This girl is about 9 years old, and she's painting her self-portrait. Okay. And here's another person. In order to know what you should think about her, I need to tell you a lot, right? Turns out she's a doctor, and she's in China, in one of the most remote regions of China, and she was a superstar in her medical program in Beijing and was offered a very prestigious training position that would have led her to leadership in the hospital. And as part of her training, she also did a stint for a few months in a very, very remote region of China to provide medical care where there is no access to it. And the long and the short of the story is that as she got involved with these peoples and communities, she realized that she had a new calling. They basically, she tells the story in the video of how these villagers chased her down the road, the path at night when she was leaving to go back to the university, to go back to Beijing, and said, like, you can't leave us. There's somebody in labor, and the baby is in trouble, the mother's in trouble. And so she turned back around and went back and saved them both. And then she realized, like, I have to give my life to this. I can't go back to Beijing and have my other previously conceived life. Like, this is needed, and this is where I'm going to stay. And she's been working ever since for getting access to medical care in these very most remote regions of China. So when you look at her now, How does she make you feel? The difference between these two kinds of recognition of excellence or admiration is that one, you could call it for skill. You can see in the here and now what you should be reacting to, and with only a little bit of cultural knowledge, you can pretty much have the emotional reaction that's warranted. Whereas the one on the right, you can't see it. You need to construct a whole narrative inside your mind of things I've told you and things I haven't that you already know about the world in order to fully appreciate how you should feel about her. When you're thinking about the doctor, but not when you're thinking about the painter, is when you're activating these modes that are associated with this so-called default. This area is active when you're reflecting inside your own mind, but it's suppressed when your attention is directed outwardly. Right? When you need to be playing the soccer game and watching the ball and like, you know, yoo-hoo, over here, don't miss the goal, right? It's not a great time to be daydreaming and reflecting on the deep ethical meaning of sports in the history of mankind, right? And then there is a time to stop and think about the deep ethical meaning of sports in the history of mankind, which is not when you're on the field, it's when you're doing something that doesn't take a whole lot of skill or attention into the immediate environment to be able to manage yourself motorically, and you kind of withdraw and reflect or build meaning with other people, and you tell yourself stories in your mind. And this leads to a whole branch of research that we're doing around what does a video game play, what does classroom practices with the 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me, all the time, right, mean for the development of these networks, because we know kids' brain development is shaped by the way in which they live and learn and think. Are we potentially biasing the brain development of an entire generation of kids into excellent eye-hand coordination, terrific attention, motoric, rule following out here right now, at the potential expense of an inner sense of self and ethical moral compass and innovation and creativity in the sense of inventing things that don't exist and thinking about the bigger, broader historical and future implications of the stuff we do? It's a question. Just leave it there with you. So, let's see, do we end at 4:15 or do we want to have 5? It's 5 and we end at 5:30. Wait, 4:15. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Do you want to see some real data, or should I skip ahead and show you all the cool developmental effects and stuff? Do you want to see what people do? All right, we won't listen to this whole thing. These are now when we get into college kids who are reacting to these kinds of stories. And I could play her video, but she speaks very slowly and very softly. But she basically is reacting to the doctor, right? And she thinks about all the stuff. She says, it makes me extremely impressed, because she went above and beyond. I think I also respect her, right, for helping herself out of her own situation and trying to help other people's situations, especially those who are less fortunate. Really, I find it really motivational too. And so we had a version of this experiment with college kids where if they said motivational, inspired, anything like that, I followed up and I said, what do you mean when you say that you find it really motivational too? Like I just used their words. And she says, kind of makes me reflect upon my own life and realize that considering that I haven't had as extreme, like uncontrollable circumstances as all these people, makes me realize, well, if they can do that, despite whatever hardships they have, then I definitely should be making more of the resources in my life. Okay. And so what I would show you in the video, but she talks very slowly, is these systematic patterns of eye gaze that she engages. And I was curious to know whether we could actually tie those patterns to moral meaning making. Because knowing that the default mode network is activated when you're not looking into the here and now and distracted and paying attention like to what you're doing here and distracted away from the inner self, might people's, and there's been like 30 years of psychological research showing people roll their eyes back, close their eyes when they're trying to remember, and doing those things helps you. Might that tie into the memory and conceptual functions of this network? Might it be a kind of evolutionary mechanism, so to speak, that turns down your outward attention, stops the interaction with the world and the distraction from the world in order to build this kind of deeper meaning? And basically, we published a paper in Social Cognitive Affective Neuroscience in 2018 that shows exactly that. I'll take you through it really quickly because probably people in here like statistics and stuff like that. What we found is that when college-age kids would avert their gaze like this, we could predict that on that story, we would show these default mode network activities later. And it also correlated in behavior with them slowing their speech rate compared to their own self as they're reacting to skill stories, pausing, right? Feeling inspired. We think inspiration, that subjective sense of meaningfulness, comes from that shift. And with things that are worldly or broad, with moral connotations. People, these are real quotes, said things like, more people in the world should be as dedicated to helping others. Or, I do believe that if given a second chance, people can change for the better. About a guy who was a gangbanger, got into prison. When he got out, he started a youth center in his old neighborhood where he does all these support things for kids and homework and stuff. He gives me hope for humanity, right? Hope for humanity is not something you can see. There is no person in the world that looks like hope for humanity. Hope for humanity is a story you construct inside your own mind that reflects a sort of general truth or disposition that can be applied in any situation in the world. That's the power of this kind of thinking. And now what I'm going to show you is that kids, young teenagers, 14 and 15 years old, who are inclined to do this kind of thinking, of course, they don't do it as brilliantly as USC students, right? But kids who are inclined to do that kind of transcendent thinking that first deals with the, like, I feel bad for her, I want to help her, oh, I see she's sad, and then pushes themselves away and says, I wonder about what this means for bigger things and for me. Kids who do that, it's only very loosely correlated with IQ and not statistically significantly so, but even controlling for IQ, we see that we can predict, based on doing that and showing default mode network activity, when they react to the story. So just saying it's not enough, you actually have to show us neurally that you're doing the work when we put you back in the scanner. We can predict, basically, that the balance in the networks, the way they trade off with each other, becomes more efficient and more clean, so to speak, by 2 years later, controlling for their starting point. So we can predict how their brain network connectivity will change over the subsequent 2 years, and then that network connectivity in turn predicts how happy and fulfilled and well they're doing as young adults by their own report. How good their relationships are, how much they say their values are things that travel with them and not things that they're struggling to figure out depending on who they're with, how much they say they like themselves, they're happy with their relationships, satisfied with their schooling or their work. So in other words, the stuff we really care about. So now I've kind of let the cat out of the bag. I'll try to take you through. Oh, this is like all the cool stats that I geek out on, showing that we can actually show trial by trial. This mediates the tendency to think abstractly. And you can read the paper if you're interested. And now we get to the cute, awesome, terrific kids. OK. So I want to just give you a sense of what this looks like when kids talk about this. So we had kids from low SES neighborhoods and immigrant parents coming to the lab every 2 years, spending a whole day with us, basically, talking about all manner of things, doing all kinds of cognitive testing at the end so they don't get threatened by it at the beginning, and just so we can mainly show, hey, look, it doesn't explain everything. Huh. And we talk with their parents, and we follow them up every 2 years. And so these are the statements from 15-year-olds about why does violence happen? They just told us all about what they witnessed. They just told us about the mugging they saw. And then we say, why do you think that happens in your community? Kids said things like, they have a lot of emotions. They're really mad, so they just killed somebody. Yeah, like overly aggressive, yeah. Or there's just people that don't care, don't listen to anyone, just basically like people who like to rebel. Or I guess it's just bad decisions that they make, and they have to suffer the consequences. They probably do things that a certain person doesn't like, and they suffer the consequence. Right? Are these concrete? Are they specific to people and situations? Or are they broad, general values and beliefs about how the world works? Right? This guy lost control of his emotions, and then he suffers the consequence. It's about the guy. Kids who did this showed when we put them in the scanner, and I can show you the data, but to take you all on a tour of the brain takes time. They showed more executive network, more of the ability to manage their attention into the world, And that was coordinated with salience network. In other words, this matters, watch the world. I'm really good at watching the world, right? And that goes with better relationships. So that's a good thing. They get along with their friends better. They have a better, more diverse group of friends. The teachers like them more. Their parents say that they're, quote unquote, easier to raise, like all that stuff. So it's good for you. It's not an either-or situation. That's something that's good. And kids who went on to talk more like this. Why does it happen? Everyone has a history. Like everybody has an action or a choice or some sort of history, some sort of thing that happened to them that affects how they act in the future. Like me, I had a loving family, right? And then he goes on to explain how that's changed who he is and compared to somebody else. The person isn't just a thing, the person acts in a system. Some awareness of the person as a process, right? Because like some gang members, maybe they like try to fit in. Maybe some people feel like left out and their families are not like, well, they don't want them. So they need somebody to talk to. And the gangs are always there, so they try to fit in with them, right? It's a much more sophisticated, complex understanding of where gang activity comes from than that guy lost control of his emotions at that moment. Or this one. Sorry to show you so much from kids, but I love the kids. I think there's not enough communication. I think the problem starts probably like it might start at school. And then over time they have problems. And once they're out of school, once they're 18, then they can start buying guns. And that's when they still have that problem. So that's when they can take bigger actions against each other, not just fighting. I mean, fist fighting, but they can also start shooting each other. And that's when more people get involved. And he's like making circles. And they're like more and more and more people. And it's a big system on the desk here. Do you see this? And that's how things get big. What can be done to make your community better, right? More abstract, more value-driven. Maybe just like be aware of surroundings. If you see somebody that's hurt, maybe ask how it happened. And well, not bully people maybe. So yeah, that. Just make them feel like they are wanted. I appreciate that every person in my community has feelings like a person. And I can't impact those feelings because we're in it together. We're in a system. I think there's always things I could do. I think it's just some people are scared to change things, and they try to stop a group of violent people when it's risky. They don't try. But if you think about your kids' futures, think about the big picture that you can't see here and now, people, it would probably be worth it to try to stop. Versus, I don't really think there's anything we could do because it just keeps happening. No matter how many laws they make to stop it, people still find a way to do it. It's all about people doing it. It's not about the future, right? I never really thought of that. Really? You've been living in this your whole life and you never thought of how to make it better? I don't feel like, I don't know, some people just take their emotions too seriously, like they just let them get out of control. All right. So basically I already told you what's in here. How kids talk relates to individual differences in these regions that we've been talking about, and I'm going to skip it, and also this, and then I'm just going to take you back and say that now we're doing work looking also at how you develop these dispositions of thinking in young people. And what we find is that kids spontaneously, meaning it comes out of them, I don't mean that it happens without effort, build ways of reinterpreting their previous beliefs into something that's more broad, general, and sort of character or psychologically oriented, rather than appearance or action oriented, which is what you need to admire skill and physical pain, by the way, to feel empathy for somebody who breaks their ankle or something, which is also the stuff we show. So these were a group of very, very low SES kids who we brought to the lab and had a 3-week science summer camp for them, incoming 10th to 12th graders that the NSF funded. And the kids don't know this, but we put flyers for this camp in like the poorest neighborhoods of Los Angeles on a Friday night after our IRB approval finally came. And we needed to get all of the kids enrolled by Monday morning, and I thought this was never going to happen. And we could enroll 20 kids, and we got kids emailing us. We had over 90 kids submit why they want to be in our camp. Right? So unbeknownst to the kids, I picked the ones who I thought would never have such an opportunity necessarily, like ones living in homeless shelters or homeless, or ones living in all kinds of incredibly poor situations. And we basically paid for everything, their transportation and everything to get there, their lunch, their books, they needed all that stuff. And before the camp, we sat each kid down, we talked to them about a lot of things, but one of the things we talked to them about was, what do you think a scientist is? What's a scientist? I love these open-ended questions for just letting kids reveal. Kids said, good at science and math, needs to be able to answer all questions, have the periodic table memorized, know everything about anything, very efficient. It's all about speed. person who worked in labs all day, taking info out of rats, a person with glasses that is skinny. They have been studying so hard that they don't have proper health and are tired or weak looking. I always think, like, why do you come to a science summer camp if that's what you think a scientist is? But anyway, a nerd who is antisocial and did not like having much fun. Same kid 3 weeks later. We don't teach them what a scientist is. I just show up with my kids cutting the bagels at snack. Hey, watch me. I'm a mom and a scientist. Hey, watch me. I don't know how to use this equipment. I'm going to ask my high school intern who's been using it all semester. Yo, Maria, could you show me how to do this? Right? They just lived science with us. And we had a whole curriculum around discovering what emotion is and how it shapes your thinking. Right? We did neuroimaging. We did all kinds of stuff. And they come away with this. Same kid. Someone who can walk into a subject blindfolded and explore and eventually become an expert. He's constantly working with instruments, which may come with no set of instructions. Imagine that. But just persevering and sticking through it until it works out. Almost completely opposite of what I used to think. Not only do scientists not spend all day in the lab, but they're constantly engaged with other scientists and they collaborate their research so it benefits them all. Very engaged, very open, cares about what others think and their ideas. Any person who is curious. Now, it's not true that being curious makes you a scientist, right? You need a whole lot of skills to go with that. But boy, curious is a way better place to start than a white lab coat and glasses and skinny, right? Why? Because one is about a disposition of mind. It's an internal habit of mind that the person brings to the opportunity. And the other is about what people look like and do. It's a shift. Now, we didn't scan these kids, so I don't know, but I think they're shifting those networks. So to just kind of wrap up and tie it to education, emotions may be automatic, right? In the sense that I don't need to, and it's a good thing for my 14-year-old. He doesn't need to remember to breathe faster, right, when he's in a rush, because boy, he'd be dead really fast if he had to think about all that. It happens for you, but the same systems in the brain and brainstem that control that are the ones that you hijack and rework to build a sense of self, a sense of excitement about knowledge and ideas. And our data suggests that even doing that, building an idea, leads to this sense of being fascinated, inspired that we see kids telling us. I have a new article in Ed Leadership that is just about to come out in May that basically explains these findings in a very colloquial way without any of the brain stuff so that you can follow that. But we have quotes from the kids showing, like, I did this, and I became fascinated with infinity, says one little kid in New York who just immigrated, who's like living in a homeless shelter, right? So high quality education, I think, accomplishes three main things. It helps students learn to build narratives, stories that reflect what they're working on. And what we also find is that building a narrative or a story that connects to big ideas in adolescence, like little kids don't have big ideas like this, but adolescents are all about them. When you connect to infinity or you connect to something big like that, it feels motivating because you somehow feel empowered to transcend your current situation and self. And that leads to brain development, is what our data show. It helps students expand the range of topics and skills and ideas that they're capable of recruiting in order to enrich and re-envision these narratives. It's not just about teaching Shakespeare in a way that is rap music, because we know these kids like rap music, right? It's about teaching Shakespeare in a way that connects to the basic human condition and relationships, because we know you have that. And so did Shakespeare, and that's why we still read him hundreds of years later, right? Connecting to those bigger ideas and reinventing narratives in spaces kids never thought they could build narratives before. You have a math narrative now. How does that feel, kid? Right? And in the service of the other two, it provides targeted and situated and differentiated support and instruction for acquiring the kinds of little building block skills that you need in order to access information and solve problems and communicate. The skills are always in service of the stories kids are building, not the other way around. When you do it the other way around, what do you get? You basically get our education system, which is boring, which is anxiety-provoking, which does not lead to a sense of self as scholar. When you do it with story first, you get self-driven learners who want to engage and who see the ethical and the bigger implications of what they're doing and allows them to innovate and move into a future that they own. And I just want to say, I've got this book. I give all the proceeds from it to education research and other kinds of educational causes. It's old now, but it's got a collection of papers basically in it that I published that I thought educators would like to have access to, but can't usually get without paywalls, so I put them all in one place. And it's now in multiple languages, Mandarin, Korean, Italian, Spanish, whatever. So you can share it. And this is a free brief that I wrote with Linda and my student Christina, which basically outlines the case for whole child education by really going through many fields of biological and ecological study and showing how they all kind of converge on this idea that we need relationships and social and emotional experience to grow the brain and the learning and the selves, and what does that mean for educational policy. And one of those is my kid. I'll let you guess. Thank you.